In the cold, calculated world of the mafia, emotion is a weakness. For Don Antonio Costello, known to most as the Viper, that weakness was currently screaming its lungs out in the middle of a high-stakes meeting. The most feared man in the city was powerless, publicly humiliated because he couldn't silence his own infant son. His authority was cracking with every piercing wail. Just as his temper was about to snap, a lone waitress slipped past his bodyguards. Her eyes weren't on the feared Dawn, they were on the crying child. In a voice both clear and steady, she said the words that would change everything. "He doesn't need to be quiet. He needs a mom." It was a simple, stunning act of bravery, a spark that would ignite a dangerous romance and test the very limits of love, loyalty, and survival. Don Antonio Costello was a man who commanded respect and fear. His empire was built on silence and absolute obedience, but in the fancy dining room of a five-star restaurant, all that power meant nothing. His infant son Leo was inconsolable after his nanny had suddenly quit. The baby's cries bounced off the walls, derailing a tense negotiation with a rival family. Antonio's men just stood there, their guns completely useless against a baby's scream. For a man who built his entire life on control, this public failure was a disaster. In his world, showing vulnerability was a death sentence. And that's when she appeared. Elara Rossi was a waitress working two jobs, a ghost in the background of the city's elite, saving every penny for a different life. She looked right past the tailored suits and the hidden guns and saw what no one else did, a child in distress. While her manager hissed at her to stay away, Elara felt a pull she couldn't fight. She walked straight toward the table, into a bubble of fear no one else dared to enter. Antonio's gaze, sharp enough to cut glass, locked onto her. His voice was low and full of warning. "The check." Elara didn't even flinch. Her focus was entirely on the red-faced, crying baby. She knelt slightly, her voice a soft hum that somehow cut through the noise. "He's not hungry, sir," she murmured, speaking more to the child than the father. Then, looking Antonio right in the eye, she delivered the fateful line, "He just needs a mom." The words hung in the air, a shocking, intimate truth in a world built on lies. Before Antonio's guards could move a muscle, he gave a short, barely noticeable nod. "Let her try." The second Elara lifted Leo from his high chair, a miracle happened. The baby's cries stuttered to a halt, replaced by a deep sigh as he snuggled into her shoulder. The entire restaurant fell silent, stunned. Antonio just stared, completely blindsided. He, the Viper, had just been saved by a woman whose name he didn't even know. Later that night, a black town car was waiting for Elara outside her rundown apartment building. She was given an offer she couldn't refuse. It wasn't a request, it was a command. Antonio Costello needed her. More importantly, his son needed her. The amount of money he offered would not just solve her problems, it would completely rewrite her future. The catch? She had to become Leo's full-time nanny and live in Antonio's lavish, cold mansion, a beautiful prison where danger was always a silent guest. Caught between fear and desperation, she accepted. Life inside the Costello estate was strange. The house was a fortress of marble and glass, stunning to look at but with zero warmth. Elara's presence was a quiet act of rebellion. She filled the sterile nursery with lullabies and the sound of laughter. She wasn't just a nanny, she was becoming a source of comfort for little Leo. And Antonio, a man who lived in the shadows, found himself drawn to her light. He started coming home earlier, making up excuses to hang around the nursery just to watch her with his son. He even caught himself smiling, an expression so rare that it made his own men nervous. He was starting to see her as more than an employee. She was becoming essential to the peace in his home and his heart. But just as their fragile connection began to form, Antonio's world came crashing in. A rival family, the Falcones, saw the new nanny not as a caregiver, but as a weakness. An ambush during a quiet afternoon drive shattered their illusion of safety. As bullets started flying, Antonio's first instinct wasn't just to shield his son, but to shield Elara too. In the aftermath, the cold, ruthless Don was back. "This is my world," he told her, his voice hard as steel. "You're either in it or you're a liability." So began the push and pull. One day he'd share a rare, vulnerable story about Leo's absent mother. The next he'd be a cold stranger, his eyes dark with the business of his work. Ilara was constantly torn between the man who made her feel safer than anyone and the monster the entire city feared. The tension between them was always simmering under the surface. But Ilara didn't just hide from the danger, she faced it. After another close call, she confronted Antonio, her voice shaking but firm. This isn't a life for a child. He needs a father, not just a Don. Her strength shocked and fascinated him. She saw the man underneath the monster and wasn't afraid to call him out. It was that same bravery from the restaurant, and it was forging a bond of respect and a dangerous attraction. Their strange domestic life continued, all while a real threat was growing. Antonio would find Ilara in the library late at night, surrounded by books on child development, determined to give Leo the best possible care. These quiet moments became their sanctuary. He started to imagine a future he never thought was possible, one with a warmth he never believed he deserved. But the Falcones weren't sitting back. They saw the bond growing between the waitress, the child, and the Don, and they came up with a plan to shatter Antonio's world by hitting him where it hurt most. A storm was coming, and Ilara, who only ever wanted to soothe a crying baby, was standing right in the middle of it. One evening, while Antonio was away at a meeting he couldn't miss, the Falcones made their move. The mansion's expensive security system was breached. Lockdown alarms blared, bathing the hallways in an emergency red glow. But Ilara didn't panic. Her only thought was Leo. She scooped him out of his crib and held him tight, her own steady heartbeat a promise that he was safe. She barricaded them inside the nursery, using her wits to block the door. When Antonio got the alert and stormed back into the house with his men, he found a bloodbath in the foyer. But he only cared about the two people upstairs. He burst into the nursery and found Ilara, fierce and protective, shielding his son with her own body. In that moment, seeing them safe, the last of Antonio's defenses came crashing down. The physical threat was over, but the emotional one had just begun. As the adrenaline faded, a raw, unspoken truth filled the room. He reached for her, his hand trembling just slightly as he brushed a stray piece of hair from her face. "They came for you," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she'd never heard from him before. "Because they know you're my weakness." Ilara looked up at him, her own eyes filled with tears. "Am I?" He shook his head, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. "No, you're my strength." He admitted everything right then and there, that from the moment she stood up to him in that restaurant, she had broken through his armor. He didn't just want her as a nanny, he needed her in his life, for him. It was a confession more terrifying than any bullet, a total surrender from a man who never surrendered. In the quiet, damaged nursery, surrounded by the proof of his violent world, they finally found their resolution. He kissed her, not with the fire of a man taking what he wants, but with the tenderness of a man who had finally found his way home. In the months that followed, the Viper began to change. For Ilara and for Leo, he started untangling himself from the deadliest parts of his business, trying to build a safer empire for his new family. The cold mansion slowly but surely filled with real laughter. The bodyguards were still there, a permanent part of their lives, but now they were guarding a family, not just a boss. Ilara never lost her bravery, and Antonio never lost his edge. But together they found a balance between the light and the dark. The waitress who saw a child's simple need had found a family, and the mafia boss who had everything finally found the one thing he was truly missing, a love strong enough to heal. And that's how a love story born from a baby's cry rewrote their destiny. It just goes to show that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the best rewards. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more tales of dangerous romance and redemption.